When Laurie Prendergast rocked up in Sydney to link up with his old friend and deadly associate, Chris Renta kill Flannery, it was probably a wise move. Back in Melbourne, he was caught up in a deadly war with the Painters and Dockers Union and the notorious Kane family. Les Kane, widely regarded as a violent psychopath, had been ambushed at his home by an elite armed robbery crew. According to Kane's wife, Prendergast was among them. She claimed they bundled her and her child into another room while they brutally executed Kane. The conflict stemmed from the fallout of the infamous Great Bucky robbery of 1976, which netted over $17 million. Kane had allegedly tried to extort money from the gang behind it and paid with his life. Kane's murder sparked immediate repercussions. In 1979, Raymond Chuck Bennett, leader of Prendergast's crew, was assassinated in a bold courthouse hit. By the end of it all, every member of the Bennett gang but one would be dead. A grim saga of greed, jealousy, bloodshed, and ruined lives. Sensing his own life was on the line, Prendergast fled to New South Wales, trying his luck in Sydney's criminal underworld. By the time Chris Flannery was settling into Sydney life with his wife Kathleen and their kids in a quiet street in Torella, the city's underworld was already feeling his presence. But behind the calm suburban exterior was a man many believed to be a psychopath with a body count. He'd come up from Melbourne with a reputation, and it wasn't long before he was mixing in with Sydney's heaviest players. One of those was Graham Abbo Henry, who first met Flannery at Q in the early 80s. Abbo was no stranger to high-level villains and could sniff out a wrong 'un at 10 paces. At that gathering, Henry was quietly warned by close friends, "Be careful with Flannery. He's not to be trusted." That warning would prove prophetic. Flannery had already served time alongside Laurie Prendergast for a vile sexual assault, which the pair always claimed was a police setup. Revenge for Flannery dodging an armed robbery rap. But whether it was true or not, the stench of that conviction followed them. The two remained close, and soon Prendergast was doing jobs with Flannery again, violent ones. According to police, one of his first jobs was the murder of barrister Roger Anthony Wilson. In August 1980, Flannery, Mark Clarkson and Kevin Williams were arrested and charged with Wilson's murder. His body was never found, but police alleged that the trio had forced him off the road, abducted him, and taken him to Pakenham, where Flannery shot him. Flannery is said to have missed, and Wilson, bleeding profusely from a head wound, tried to escape. Flannery is then alleged to have gone mad and emptied his gun into Wilson's head and back. Flannery was professional enough to know that in the world of organised crime, it is preferable to not leave a body of evidence for police to work with. And sadly, for Wilson's family, his body was never retrieved, and Flannery and his co-accused got acquitted. But no sooner had Flannery stepped out of the courthouse than he was grabbed by New South Wales detectives and charged with the murder of Raymond Loxley, a brothel owner gunned down in 1979. At his trial in 1982, the jury couldn't reach a verdict. A retrial was set for April 1984, but Flannery dodged it. He produced a medical certificate from Dr. Jeffrey Edelston, claiming he was unfit to stand trial. It was a con. Edelston was later jailed for perverting the course of justice and soliciting Flannery to assault a former patient. After the legal dust settled, Flannery settled into his Torella home, bringing his wife and kids back from Melbourne. He took a job as bodyguard to George Freeman, one of Sydney's most powerful crime figures. But even Freeman couldn't rein Flannery in. At this point, Flannery was putting himself about as a gun for hire. His path crossed with Neddy Smith, a 6'6" street tank, with connections, cash, and a growing empire in protection, robbery, and drug deals. Neddy had a past almost as dark as Flannery's. He too had served time for a sickening sexual assault. Despite that, he and Graham Abbo Henry had been close for a few years after meeting. But when Neddy brought Flannery into the fold, tension started simmering. Originally, Neddy Smith and Graham Henry had discussed killing Flannery when he first came onto the scene. They had heard rumours that he was being paid to off them. They confronted him, but he reassured them that wasn't the case, and himself and Neddy Smith became close. They would sit for hours having a drink, trying to outdo each other with stories from their violent pasts. According to Henry, the writing was on the wall. He could see the two unhinged men bonding over their shared violent tendencies. The split between Henry, Smith, and Flannery was cracked wide open when Flannery approached them with a proposition to help him kill Officer Michael Drury, who had refused to take dirty money from Flannery's associate Alan Williams. This casual request outraged the hot-headed Graham Henry. He was furious and declined the invitation, but according to Henry, Neddy Smith was more receptive. This led to bad blood between Neddy Smith and Graham Henry. According to Henry, this led to Flannery and Smith conspiring to kill him. This would seem to be a huge overreaction, but possibly Smith had other grievances against Henry, and during this bloody era of Sydney's underworld, bodies were dropping at a rate of knots. The end to their partnership came one day when Henry had driven into Sydney to collect money off Neddy Smith. It was a trap, but Henry had been forewarned and gone in heavy. Sure enough, Flannery was there. Abbo spotted the move. In an instant, he pulled a gun and aimed it right between Flannery's eyes, ready to put an end to Mr. Renta kill. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, a barmaid walked in. Her timing saved Flannery's life. After that, Henry knew the gloves were off. According to him, Prendergast and Flannery made several more attempts to kill him. All failed. The alliance between Smith, Flannery, and Henry had shattered, and Sydney's underworld politics was spiralling into something darker. By late 1984, the Sydney Gangland War was fully raging. Flannery picked a side, Neddy's, and started going off the rails. Smith later said Flannery was running around shooting at anyone he thought had anything to do with Barry McCann and Tom Domercan. The crooked police tried brokering peace, but Flannery wasn't having it. When told to settle down, he looked a senior cop in the eye and said, "You're not a protected species. You're not a fucking koala." Then came the attempted assassination of drug squad detective Michael Drury on the 6th of June, 1984. Drury had refused a bribe to drop charges against Flannery's mate, Alan Williams. Williams later testified that he'd offered $50,000 each to Flannery and corrupt cop Roger Rogerson to kill Drury. Drury was shot in his home, but lived to tell the tale. The violence followed Flannery everywhere. On 27 January 1985, someone sprayed his house with 30 bullets from an Armalite rifle. Flannery was hit in the hand while shielding his wife. He blamed Domercan, who was charged but later cleared. Rogerson was spotted hanging around the scene days later and told police he was just curious to see what kind of damage a gun like that could do. Flannery kept pulling triggers. On 23rd April 1985, he was allegedly sent to murder Tony Spaghetti Eustace. Eustace was found outside the airport Hilton, bleeding out beside his gold Mercedes, hit 6 times in the back. He died soon after, refusing to talk to police. By now, Flannery was suspected of at least a dozen murders, but his luck ran out just weeks later. By early May 1985, Flannery's paranoia was peaking. Friends turned into enemies overnight. Whispers on the street said even George Freeman was tiring of him. The killings, the heat, the unpredictable violence, it was drawing too much attention. And Flannery, he was losing his grip. Just days after his house was sprayed with bullets, he moved into a high-rise apartment near CIB headquarters in the heart of Sydney. Some say it was strategy, stay close to the police and maybe no one would come gunning. Others believed he'd finally lost it. On 9th May 1985, Flannery got a call. Freeman wanted to meet. Flannery went to leave but couldn't get his car to start. He phoned Freeman, who told him to grab a cab. Flannery did. He stepped out of the Connaught on Liverpool Street and vanished into thin air. He was never seen again. There were theories, plenty of them. Some claimed Flannery was murdered by the same underworld players, who once welcomed him with open arms. A hit ordered by Freeman, carried out to end the chaos. Others believed Neddy Smith had finally had enough, especially after Flannery made one too many threats and started aiming guns at people with ties to Neddy's own deals. But the most compelling story came from Smith himself. He later claimed that on the day Flannery disappeared, he saw him getting into a police car, driven by detectives Smith knew well. The implication: the police killed Flannery, either to shut him up, settle old scores, or as payback for the attempted hit on Michael Drury. That same year, Smith would go on to claim he'd been part of more than a dozen murders, later retracting some and standing by others. But on Flannery, his story stayed mostly consistent. He was out of control, dangerous, and had to go. It wasn't until 1997, over a decade later, that New South Wales coroner, Greg Glass, officially ruled Flannery was murdered, likely on or around 9th May 1985. The coroner pointed the finger squarely at Rogerson, calling him the key to solving the murder. That same year, Rogerson, no stranger to scandal, dismissed the fuss. On national television, he said, "Flannery was a complete pest. The guys up here in Sydney tried to settle him down. They tried to look after him, but he was out of control. Maybe it was the Melbourne instinct coming out of him. He didn't want to do as he was told. He overstepped the line. And when a man like Flannery overstepped, there was no coming back. In the end, his body was never found. His killer or killers never charged. His story, like so many in the blood-soaked annals of Sydney's gangland past, ended in a whisper, the kind only spoken about behind locked doors and in hushed tones. What's certain is this: Flannery's warpath reshaped Sydney's underworld, and his disappearance left a trail of silence that still stays mute to this day. If Chris Flannery was the loose cannon of Sydney's underworld, Laurie Prendergast was the ghost that slipped through its cracks. Cold, calculating, and quiet. He didn't rant or rage like Flannery. He didn't posture. He moved like mist, silent but toxic. By the mid-80s, Laurie was back in Flannery's orbit. The pair had done jail time together for a brutal sexual assault, an attack they always claimed was stitched up by corrupt cops. But time behind bars hadn't dulled their taste for blood. When Flannery needed a shadow to back him on jobs, Prendergast was never far behind. As Sydney's gang war escalated, Prendergast became the phantom gunman. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but people in the know said Laurie had a taste for the final shot, the one that ended it. He was rumoured to be with Flannery on a number of jobs, including attempted hits that failed only by inches or dumb luck. And according to Abbo, Laurie was there when he himself was nearly set up. After Flannery's failed ambush in a Sydney bar, where Abbo pulled a gun first and nearly blew Flannery's head off, the feud was on. Over the months that followed, Abbo claimed that Prendergast and Flannery made several attempts on his life. Each time, Henry slipped the net, but he knew the noose was tightening. Then, just like Flannery before him, Prendergast vanished. No body, no trace, no bullet casings, nothing. The timing was eerie. It was in the months following Flannery's disappearance in May 1985 that Prendergast started asking too many questions. Others claim he was still loyal to Flannery, furious that the hitman had been ghosted with no explanation. And in the underworld, loyalty can get you killed just as quick as betrayal. There's a theory, whispered through jailhouse phones and backroom pubs, that Laurie started snooping around the wrong names, that he began pressuring Neddy Smith and even Rogerson, demanding to know what had really happened to Flannery, that he was asking questions about the police and who among them had been in that unmarked car Flannery was last seen entering. If the stories are true, Prendergast made the fatal mistake of acting like a threat, not just to the criminals, but to the cops wrapped up in it all. What's known for sure is this: Laurie Prendergast disappeared in 1987 Melbourne. Was it the Sydney underworld cleaning up business, or old vendettas from Melbourne's gangland? His wife said he slept with a pistol under his pillow and was only too aware that his life was at risk.